today. Quite the weekend we've had, and now finish up with turtles. It's kind of a nice, I think, a nice little break. All right, so I'm with NOAA Fisheries. Just to orient you a little bit with NOAA, there's two sides of the house to NOAA. There's a management side of the house and a research side of the house. And I sit in the management side, so I'm not a researcher. I'm not in the field catching turtles, but I work mostly in policy and conservation actions. And so you're going to get that kind of picture of turtles today. All right, let's start from the beginning. Sea turtles they're air-breathing marine reptiles that depend on both land and sea, right? That's just, by definition, that's what a sea turtle is. They're cold-blooded. They're reptiles. They're cold-blooded, and that's going to come into play a little bit later. They lay eggs, hence the dependence on the land portion. They must come to land to lay their eggs. Their head and flippers do not retract. Unlike a tortoise, a land tortoise, sea turtles, their flippers and their heads stay outside of their shell. And then they're the living representatives of a group of reptiles that have existed on Earth and traveled the seas for over 150 million years. So they've been around for a very long time. And because of that, let's go forward. I thought it's always appropriate in Hawaii, I feel, to sort of ground ourselves within the cultural context of turtles, given that they have been on Earth for 150 million years, which means they've evolved as humans evolved. So we evolved together. Throughout many cultures throughout the world, sea turtles have become an emblem of longevity, wisdom, fertility, protection from harm, often sort of revered as the foundational creature upon which the world was created. I once saw a photo of a totem from Africa, and there was actually turtles below and elephants above. So the fact that turtles were even below elephants in Africa is pretty, sort of tells me a lot. Archaeological evidence indicates that man's first writing was done on the back of a turtle shell. The first known coin has a turtle on it. The turtle's represented in Mayan astronomy and so on and so forth. It's just, we know that it's foundational to sort of culture, and as humans and turtles evolved, they evolved together. So turtles, of course, here in Polynesia, same thing. They're intrinsic to the traditions and cultures of Polynesia. They're named in the fourth verse of the Kumulipu, which is the Hawaiian creation chant. There's numerous legends and myths about turtles. I'll just bring a few up here. There's a famous story of Kauila, the turtle goddess that lives in the sea, in the salt ponds of Honolulu, that emerges to protect the keiki when they swim. There's myths and legends that say that the Honu guided the first inhabitants to Hawaii. Actually, I'll go back real quick. This picture right here, where you see that line, you've seen that petroglyph many, many times, right? And there's that line, and I recently learned that line is the symbolic symbolism of the turtle bringing the Hawaiians to Hawaii. Now you know what that line means. I always wondered, why is there a line there? Because there's no line, if you look at the carapace of a turtle, there's no line there, so it's like kind of odd. Anyhow, the war god, too, is represented by the turtle, and warriors were typically adorned with Honu tattoos. And Honu was reserved for the chief. We knew this. It was the chief's fish, indicating the turtle was deeply associated with the chief's genealogy. The turtle wasn't for everyone. And many Hawaiians even today consider turtles to still be their aumakua, their spiritual totem that oversees and provides protections. And so because of all this, really what it tells me and where I come from the management side of the house, it has to do with this sense of reverence and respect, right? It's that which I feel is the foundation from which we build, right? So coming back to that always, I feel is very important. All right, so let's jump ahead to our modern turtles. Sea turtles of the Pacific. How many do we have? 5. This is going to be an interactive talk. Be prepared to shout out answers. 5. Okay, we've got 5 species in the Pacific. We've got our leatherbacks, loggerheads, and olive ridleys. These are our open ocean migrators. These guys are migrating in the open seas. You're not going to see them because they're not coastal. They don't come close to Hawaii, but they occur within our Hawaiian waters. And our Hawaiian waters extend out to 200 miles in the EEZ, right? So they're out there in the high seas. These guys nest in Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and they migrate across to feed off the coast of California. And then back again. Loggerhead turtles nest only in Japan and in Australia. They too swim across the Pacific and back again during their life cycle. Olive ridleys, Mexico and India, those are the primary nesting beaches, and they crisscross the Pacific. So these are our open ocean guys. And these are our greens and our hawksbills. They're our island associated species. They like it close to shore, kind of nearby. And if you've been in Hawaii long enough, you know you've probably seen plenty of the green turtles. So we'll talk a lot about greens today. All right, so general threats to all of these species, which is why they're protected. Basically, number one threat is that harvest. So harvest, again, when we talk about humans and turtles coexisting for millennia, it really comes down to sustainable harvest and the over-harvest that's happened over time, right? Fishery interactions, both artisanal, commercial, recreational, high seas fisheries, nearshore fisheries, they take a pretty good hit, turtles do. Disease, marine debris, and ingestion of marine debris, and I kind of clump like things like oil pollution together with that. Habitat loss, climate change, predation, and then localized threats, and we'll talk about those for Hawaii in a minute. So because of those threats, turtles are protected. All 5 species are protected. They're protected by state and territory laws. They're protected under the Federal Endangered Species Act, and I put the text of the act there to sort of orient ourselves in terms of what they are protected by. It's illegal to harass, harm, pursue, hunt, shoot, wound, kill, trap, capture, collect, or attempt to engage in any of such conduct. So this is the definition. When I say they're protected, that's what they're protected by. And then the international law basically prohibits the international trade of turtles or turtle products, such as if you had jewelry, you go to somewhere and turtles are protected pretty much everywhere you go, but yet black market still exists. You can still buy some products. If you buy it and you try to come into Hawaii, it can be confiscated. And depending on how much of it you have or what you have, you could also be fined at the airport. All right, so let's talk a little bit about sea turtle life history, because I think all of those different threats come into different stages of that turtle's life history. It's pretty complex, so I'll walk through it step by step. We'll start at the nesting beach with the female. Remember, they're dependent on land for laying their eggs, so they come up on shore. The female comes to the nesting beach. She goes to the same nesting beach where she was hatched 35, 40, 50 years ago. Okay, she comes up and she digs a hole and she lays her eggs. Now, what kind of threats do you think might affect that female?
Birds.
Bird is going to take I don't think a bird's going to take an adult female, but a dog maybe.
Well,
right, people. But to the mother, harvest, people, right?
Dogs.
Any kind of development on the beach.
Right. Yeah, lights, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so when they're on the nesting beach, this is really the only time that we can easily access them for science, right? This is when you can measure them. This is the leatherback. This is when you can measure them, you can tag them, and then she takes off. And this is, so for many, many years, for decades, over 30 years, this is really where sea turtle research was. It sort of lived on the beach, because that's the accessible part of the population, is the nesting female. All right, so all baby turtles start as eggs buried deep in the sand. A female will lay about 100 eggs per nest, and those eggs will incubate for about 2 months. So this is the literal meaning of Mother Earth. Okay, so she incubates her eggs. Again, threats to the eggs might be what we talked about: predation, dogs, crabs, people, right? All right, after about 2 months, that nest will hatch, and so all those little hatchlings will work together to get themselves out of that nest. And then they make that mad dash to the sea. And so on their way, as they're racing to the sea, then they face a whole nother set of threats, right? This is where the birds might come in. This is where the fish are going to come in. People don't typically eat them because they're very crunchy at this stage. There's nothing really you can get out of a hatchling, but birds and any kind of predator is pretty much their biggest issue. Also lighting, and we got lucky with this photo. These little hatchlings emerged during the day, and it really wasn't isn't typical how it happens. It typically happens at night, between midnight and 2, 3 in the morning. But we went to this is us, we went to Saipan, and we were working with the local researchers there, and they knew that a nest was about to hatch, and it hadn't hatched, and so they went and they dug it up, and there was a big rock that had gotten sort of on top of the nest. So when we sort of pulled the cork, all these little hatchlings kind of came out. So it was really cool. So we got some good footage. All right, so then these little hatchlings go out to sea, and they're out at sea for about 5 to 7 years. They're little, they're just out there. And this is just sort of what they do. This is their life cycle. And so what can affect them at that stage?
Starvation.
Yeah, exactly. Starvation, marine debris, ingesting marine debris, getting tangled up in marine debris, usually. And then, of course, a lot of fish. And so then at some point, about 5-7 years later, these little juveniles returned back to Hawaii. Okay, and that's one of the biggest mysteries of turtles. How does a Hawaiian turtle that's been out at sea in the ocean for 5 to 7 years know to come back to Hawaii? An Indonesian turtle goes back to Indonesia, Mexican turtle goes back to Mexico, Japanese turtle goes back to Japan. How they know to do that, that's really one of their biggest mysteries that we have yet to unravel. Anyhow, so now they're in our coastal environment. We call them their little platter size. You know, this is me holding this little guy, just recently settled into the near coast. If you see them, sometimes they're really, really clean. Like this one, look at how clean that one is. Super clean, super shiny, and they're usually really skittish. They're like, they kind of like aren't sure where they've just arrived to, and now they got to figure it out, right? And now they're dealing with all these people and all the stuff that's going on. Here we've got a little hawksbill, and we'll talk about them in a minute. You can see how different this one looks from the green in terms of its shell and its face.
So when you're going through this life cycle, it's just for the greens and the hawksbills. The other 3 species don't come back at 5 to 7 years.
So their life cycle is very similar, but their life cycle is a little different. So Japanese loggerheads, for example, will enter the North Pacific currents and they will swim for 5 or 7 years or so, and then show up in Japan and Mexico. So they will grow in Mexico, and then when they're mature, they will migrate back. Kind of thing. So they have a little bit, but they still have that kind of like, exactly. Yeah. All turtles have that sort of pelagic out there or so, and then they sort of reemerge and we start to see them in coastal habitats. Yeah. All right. So then subadults. So I like to call our little juveniles our second graders, right? So they're about 7 years old or so. Okay. And then we got our subadults that are about, you know, our preteen teenagers, about 15, 14 years old. They're just still growing. We've got cleaning stations where we've got fish cleaning them. So at this stage is where the threats are really significant for this age class, because now they've been living around humans for a while. This is where fisheries might start to come into play. Disease might come into play. Fire papilloma here in Hawaii. So it really affects our subadults. And then at about 25 to 30 years old, they become adults, and then they migrate back to their nesting beach to lay their eggs again. So this is French Frigate Shoals, where our green turtles nest. You can sort of see how flat that island is. A lot of birds. So, and at this stage, there's very little that's going to get them at this stage, because remember, they've been designed to sustain tiger sharks, right? So they're really strong and hardy. So there's very little other than, at this stage, would be our human-induced impacts, which would be fisheries or people taking them. All right, so from egg all the way back to adult, takes about 25 to 35 years. Less than 1% of hatchlings reach adulthood. And that's sort of how these animals are designed. They are designed to sustain high levels of mortality at the early life stage. So that female will pump out eggs, and she'll actually lay 4 to 5 nests per season. So she'll do that. So she'll go to her nesting beach, she'll lay her eggs, she'll go right offshore for about 2 weeks, and then go back and lay another clutch, and then go back out for about 2 weeks, and then do that cycle for about 4 or 5 times, and then she's done and she heads back to her foraging habitat.
Is this all in one mating?
She may mate with males that are in the area. Yeah, that part's unclear. There are some clutches that have the fathers, there's only one father, and then other clutches where there's multiple fathers, and so there's not just one way, right? Okay, so let's talk about our Hawaiian turtles. So in Hawaii, we have our green turtles and we have Hawksbill turtles. Has anyone ever seen a Hawksbill? You have? Awesome. We'll talk more about where you saw one. I'm curious. That's awesome. Okay, so
Yeah, sometimes they see them out.
okay. Okay, cool.
At the end, if anyone wants to see, we have a little book. We were in the dawn patrol on Maui, and I have pictures of it.
Oh, you've been on Maui. Okay, right. We do have hawksbills on Maui. Yeah. Okay, so we have our greens and our hawksbills. So our green turtles, one of our part of newest developments in terms of management is we have a number of years ago in 2012, we were petitioned and we actually started the process of looking at the species and doing a global green turtle assessment under the ESA. So at that time, green turtles were listed as one global species. And so you can imagine if you're trying to protect and recover one global species that nests in over 80 countries in the world, it's nearly impossible. And so, but over the last 40 years, we've also learned a lot about turtles genetically, migratory habits, you know, foraging habitats. So we've learned so much. And so what we did, and what we've just recently come out with is that we have 11 distinct population segments. Each of these distinct population segments are qualified to be called species under the ESA, so they have their own level of protections. 3 of those populations, the Mediterranean, the Western Pacific, and the South Pacific, were uplisted to endangered status, and all the others are listed still as threatened status, and our Hawaii population is here. And what's really interesting about Hawaii is that we know now that they are genetically distinct to Hawaii. So our Hawaiian green turtles, we don't find them in Mexico. We don't find them in Japan. They live here in Hawaii. And they also look a little bit different. Their morphology is just a little different as well. So you can really tell. People who know green turtles, Hawaiian green turtles, know that they can tell them the difference when they see another turtle. So anyhow, so that's something important for us, is that we're our own distinct population segment. It doesn't really matter, it doesn't affect you in any way and in how you look at turtles, but it does affect my world in terms of like how we're, managing the species.
Can these turtles interbreed if they get?
They could interbreed, but that would be a low chance of that happening, I think, for sure.
So, are they considered a subspecies then?
No, they're not a subspecies. No, they would just be their own distinct population segment. Yeah, still within that green turtle umbrella, but yeah. Because the point is that we could, let's say Mexico, they could eat their turtles to extinction and we would still have turtles in Hawaii, right? And vice versa, right? That's just what we have come to learn about how the species sort of lives within its waters. So the justifications for threatened, why is it still threatened? We see so many turtles out there. Why are we calling them threatened still? And so while we understood and recognized that there's been a long-term increase in the nesting trend, it's still a small nesting population with less than 4,000 nesting females. So compared to other green turtle populations, that's really, really low. Compared to Australia, for example, over 100,000 green turtle nesters, right? So we still have a very small, very immature population. We have a very limited spatial distribution in Hawaii. That's it. That's our limited distribution. There's not much we can do about that, except for the fact that 96% of the population is nesting at one atoll in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. That's very, very susceptible to climate change and sea level rise. Okay, it's 2 feet higher than the ocean. This is, you can see it right here. That's French Frigate right here. So
I've been to turtle nesting farms in Turks and Caicos and somewhere else, I don't remember where. So if they raise turtles. So could you take turtles from this one atoll and put them in another
you could.
spot? And then would their offsprings come back to the beach where you moved them, or would they go back to the atoll?
They would imprint on the beach that they hatch from.
So this turtle, I've been to a couple of them.
Uh-huh.
So they have birthing areas. So all the turtles that birth there, then for their life cycle on future generations are all going to go back to this turtle farm.
Right, to Turks and Caicos. Well, those turtle farms, they're not producing them to release them. They're producing them to eat them.
To eat. They're farms for eating
Yeah.
and harvested.
The 2 that I went to, they're regulated by the government. They have to do percentages of everything they do release.
We could talk more about that. There's quite a bit of research and controversy having to do with the farming of turtles. I mean, here you're about 800 miles from the main islands, right? So to relocate turtles that are nesting at French Frigate means you need to put them on a boat. Means you can't rotate an egg or you kill it. So the logistics of moving a nest from French Frigate to the main islands is almost impossible, right? So that's one of our biggest challenges. What happens in the future, right? As the sea level rises.
We had a research project in Galveston where we did the camps.
Right. That's a good example.
And that
Right,
was a successful program,
Right.
somewhat,
right, somewhat.
somewhat.
In those cases, they could drive those nests to relocate
Right.
them, put them in an airplane. You can't deal with that. And so it's possible. It is possible, and it has happened. I mean, the thing to keep in mind is that the turtles have lived on Earth for 150 million years, right? They've seen islands and continents change, come and go, right? But the challenge now is, and we know they can adapt, right? And we know that there's founder populations, and that a female may just randomly start nesting on a random beach, and then her nest will start to imprint on that beach, and then that's how a population starts. But can they keep up with the level and the speed of change that's happening now? That's the big unknown. You know, they won't just disappear, but how are they going to evolve, and how are they going to adapt? That's really our big, we're gonna have to watch that.
Could you repeat what she said she was facing that way? Oh, the camps fiddling?
Oh, so she was just pointing out another example of active management where they relocated nests with the Kemp's Ridley.
In the Gulf of Mexico. But they didn't relocate nests. We raised them in buckets. It was so funny, you go into the room and over years, the flippers on the buckets. And then when they reached a certain age, we would transport them to Mexico.
Oh,
To then release them from the beach in Mexico that we hoped they would go back to lay their eggs. But we didn't relocate nests. We relocated juvies.
okay.
Okay, sorry.
All right, so just another example of then and now, and this is sort of something that comes into play when we're looking at, you know, where do we define recovery, and what tools do we have to understand what the population is doing. And this is some research, just an example of then and now research that just came out a few years ago. So the green the solid triangles are current nesting beaches right now. So French Frigate Shoals is our primary nesting beach, and the circles is the historic size of that nesting beach. So French Frigate is pretty much the same size that it was pre-contact, but you can see all the other beaches. So there were once very large nesting beaches throughout the archipelago, and today we only have one large nesting beach left. And so, you know, here as well, we had Lanai was one very large nesting beach, and we have just very small, about 20 turtles that are nesting down Lanai. So this sort of, you know, at what place, at what stage do we sort of set recovery, and what are our goals? Are we trying to get back to this? Can our foraging habitat sustain that level of turtles? These are all questions that we have to figure out. So here's our Hawaiian archipelago, just to orient us. Here's French Frigate Shoals. Here's Oahu, where we're at. Shore of the Big Island is where our hawksbills are nesting. We've got 2 or 3 also nesting on Maui, but for the most part, about 15 turtles, 15 to 20 nest on the Big Island. 800 or so are nesting at French Frigate Shoals, and these are greens. And so that's our green turtle nesting trend. This is East Island, where most of the nesting occurs there at French Frigate. Here you can also see what that island looks like, right, and how susceptible it is to sea level rise. 73 is when the research started. At that time, there were 62 nesting females. And you can see over time how the population has responded. The state's protection sort of came in around this time. So you can see it hasn't been a literal jump. It sort of has done this up and down thing, which is very typical of a green turtle nesting trend. Some years high, some years low, and we believe that's correlated to foraging habitat and how well the foraging is. Remember, they're a reptile. Reptiles have this unique ability to sort of like shut down when food's not really great and conditions aren't optimal. They're okay. They just sort of, you know, live through it until suddenly there's, you know, good eating. So population is increasing. Last year, I don't have this map updated. Last year, we actually had barely 100 turtles nesting. So it's really interesting when you see that cycle of up and down.
Data for 2013?
No, because there was no data, because December 2012, a big storm came through and wiped out French Frigate Shoals, or the barracks there where people used to stay. So there was nowhere for the researchers to stay that year, and so we had to figure out a new sort of camp situation for this following year. All right, so what are green turtles doing when they're in Hawaii? When they're on the beaches, they're either nesting, Here's our little volcano of hatchlings. I was giving a presentation to some second graders one time, and I was explaining how they all sort of work to get out of the ground together. And this one little girl goes, "Oh, like a volcano of turtles." I'm like, exactly. It's exactly what it is. A little volcano of turtles sort of erupt out of the sand together. And you can kind of see it here in this model. So they're either nesting, that's why they're on land, or they're basking in Hawaii. Really the only place in the world where they bask. We are so lucky. This is the only place where they do it. They technically bask in other places, but in like the Galapagos, for example, or Australia, but it's more of a situation of they're foraging in this shallow reefy area and the water recedes, and so they just sort of hang out, and we call them baskers instead of, they're not stranded. They're just waiting for the water to come back so they can swim away. Whereas here, they actively crawl out onto the, and you've seen that probably, right? Where they crawl out onto the sand. And so that's the only place where they do that, where they crawl out. And we really believe that it's really about regulating their body temperature. If you can imagine here, they have sort of like a solar panel, right? And they're reptiles, remember? Cold-blooded, they need to warm up. So they'll do it on the beach and they'll also do it in the water as well. So they'll bask on the surface of the water.
If they're cold-blooded, why would they have to warm up?
That's just sort of the definition of being cold-blooded. They need the environmental heat to sort of get their body moving, which is why they live in tropical and subtropical areas. They don't live in Alaska. We don't have turtles up there. They just can't do it. So they have to live in warm waters. And so when I'm talking about basking, this is what I'm talking about. So this is French Frigate shoals. That's basking at French Frigate. That basking is coming to the main islands, and we need to prepare ourselves for that because that is going to happen. And actually in Maui, it's already happening. At Ho'okipa, they crawl out en masse. I've been there and I counted over 86 turtles, and they were still coming up when I had to leave. And so they will just, it is incredible. They've basically reclaimed habitat that was once lost to them. If you can imagine, back when they were being harvested and and we had a commercial fishery for turtles, those turtles that were on the beach would have been easy pickings, right? Yeah. So they have reclaimed their habitats and they're sort of coming back in force.
That's the green.
That's the green turtle, yeah. So in terms of for Oahu, we have maps here for all of the different islands. I'm only going to show you Oahu right now. So our basking habitats really tends to be the north shore of Oahu. We have some scattered basking that happens in other places, but really the bulk of it's happening on the north shore. And we're starting to see some nesting happening, which is really kind of good. We're seeing them sort of start to lay their eggs in different baskets now. So we have a few females in Kahuku. That would be the beach I would consider to be the nesting beach on Oahu, would be Kahuku here. It's a wildlife refuge, which is awesome. The sand and the beach there is perfect for them. They've got 5 or so turtles that seem to use that pretty regularly. So,
Is this part of the land that the city just bought?
Fish and Wildlife has this land here.
Okay, so but it's protected land?
Yeah, it's protected, yes, which is great. Here, the community on the North Shore is starting to, I'm getting reports every now and again of more hatchlings and more turtles being seen nesting. So it's also starting to pick up here. What's interesting is that Sea Life Park has been releasing hatchlings because their turtles at Sea Life Park have been nesting. They have this small little beach. They didn't expect it to happen, but they've been nesting there. And they get to, and they don't even know they've got a nest. The keepers come and they go to work one day and they just see the pond full of little hatchlings, and so they collect them all and they release them, and they've been releasing them here. So interestingly enough, we're getting some nesting happening here at the, over by Makapu. And so the question is, are these turtles related to these turtles? Because they would, they're more imprinted to Oahu than they're not imprinted to French Frigate. So, or either we have lazy females that don't want to make the swim, or we've got some new founders happening here on Oahu, which is very promising. So this is our promising turtles to sort of counteract that climate change impact. Yes.
There's no way to tell though, right, if they're the Makapu turtles?
They are looking at it genetically. It's not easy, but they're trying to figure that out through genetics.
Of course, on the Big Island.
Yeah, there's some other. Yeah, there is some scattered nesting as well on the Big Island as well. Yeah, Honolulu has some green turtles.
I mean, the release at,
Okay.
yeah.
But those turtles that are being released there tend to be 2 years old, and so they're much larger. They're not the hatchlings, and so that's the question: where are those turtles going to go back to?
So they could be actually tagged as zero.
Yeah, those ones would be tagged. Followed.
We've always.
Yeah,
well,
those-
Many years it said there's no proof that the Sea Life Park ones are coming back at all. But you need to know.
Right. They haven't yet. I haven't heard that those turtles have been found nesting yet. Okay, so in the marine environment, what are they doing? They're foraging, resting, they're migrating. Remember, this is a species that doesn't actually need to be anywhere until it's almost 30 years old, right? So they have a luxury of just growing and eating. Do you guys see the male in these pictures? This one right here. The male has the long tail.
Yeah.
And he grows that tail as soon as he hits maturity. It's not like it's not a gradual growth. It's suddenly he's sexually mature and that tail grows very fast. So you don't know it's a male until you see that big tail.
So that's 25 years about?
25, 30-year-old turtle, at least. 25 would be on the low end, 30, 35. It really depends on the quality of the habitat that it sort of settles into, you know, and how lush that habitat is for how fast it might grow. So in terms of migrations, back in '96, in the 90s, they put some tags out on some post-nesting females. So after she finished nesting, they put a tag on her to see how she migrated back to the main islands. And you can see there's not really one road. You know, they all but they somehow get back to Oahu and Maui. This turtle took a nice long trip, but she ended up coming back. And then we had one turtle that actually went down to Johnson for a bit of a trip to Johnson, but she's been resighted back on Oahu and back at French Frigate. So for whatever reason, she took a trip that year. I tend to think that, you know, basically this gives me a general understanding of what turtles are doing. If one's doing it, others are doing it. So obviously there is a connection happening here between Johnson and French Frigate, and there is some pelagic movement. Obviously they're not just all, you know, very tight coastal, but kind of gives you a sense of what's happening. Here's a migration in the opposite direction. Here was a basker at Laniakea that we knew was going to take off. She'd been really consistent, nesting every 3 years, and so they timed it. They put a tag on her, and she headed off, and she, you can see she sort of passed French Frigate, but she oriented and found herself. So it's not like a straight shot, but they do figure it out. And this is her inner nesting sort of off the beach, you know, where she laid 5 nests that year and sort of kind of hovering right off the island and then back to the nest and then back off the island. So, and then interestingly, she lost a flipper during that migration. So when she came back to Laniakea, she was missing a flipper. So. Yeah, shark probably, yeah. Our juveniles as well. What are our juveniles doing? So again, if one's doing it, others are doing it. So we got one giving us a look of a quick pelagic migration, and others are mostly coastal, sort of hugging that coast. All right, so what are conservation concerns in Hawaii? So the status review tells us that climate change and sea level rise is really our biggest threat in Hawaii at this point right now, and to understand how are they going to adapt to how fast things are changing currently. Habitat loss and coastal development, as you know, you live here, you see it, a lot of development, our reefs are suffering because of it. How are those reefs going to sustain our turtle population? After all of that, nearshore fishery interactions is really our biggest problem. Our biggest issue is nearshore fishery interactions. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Boat strikes also happen. We don't get a lot, but they do definitely happen, especially near harbors. Disease, this is fire papilloma. So the disease itself has gone down over time, which is really great. Back in the 90s, they sort of thought that fire papilloma was going to wipe out the population, but it sort of ran its course as sort of an epidemic. And so now, while we still see it, it still persists in the population. It's not something that we fear is going to sort of decimate the population. It has figured itself out. It seems to have regressed in some cases. Fishery interactions really is my biggest concern right now, are nearshore interactions. Tourism and public disturbance is an issue. Illegal harvest continues to happen, we know that. And then we have our hawksbills, which is a small and isolated population, very isolated. So these are our issues in Hawaii, and this is sort of where the world that I work in, and so that's where I spend a lot of my time and a lot of my efforts. So fishing around turtles, this is a program that's been going on now for about, I want to say 8 years or so, and it's starting to kind of pick up some speed and some steam. Fishermen are really starting to get on board. Instead of telling people what not to do, we're giving them information on what to do, right? We're asking for them to help. We want to let them know that it is okay to help. And this actually came from fishermen themselves, that we're doing the right thing. And now we come in and we're basically validating their good work. And so if it's safe for both you and the turtle, Like you're not on a cliff or anything, but if you're safe, if you're in a place where you can actually reel in that animal and get the line off, because it's the line that kills it, not the hook, right? So get the line off the animal and then release it with no line attached. That's really what we're encouraging fishermen to do. We know interactions happen, and as the population continues to grow, interactions are going to keep happening because fishing is not illegal in Hawaii. That people can fish. There's nothing wrong with being a fisherman and fishing in Hawaii. So if you're going to fish, we just want you to know, what the best guidance is, honestly. And so this is our decal that we give to fishermen, and we have some here. You can help yourselves when you leave. It gives in that guidance. We want fishermen to also use barbless circle hooks. Just crimp that barb, smash it down. And, if you catch a fish that's not what you're after, it's too small, not the right species, that fish can be released really easily too. We have, fish resource issues here in Hawaii as well. So we want to overfish. We want to be, fish pono. And if you catch a turtle by accident, that hook can come out as well too. So it's really easy. So using barbless, and then know what to do if an accidental interaction happens. All right, and boating around turtles. We know, again, as the population grows, people like to, drive their boats and have boats out there. So remember that turtles live in harbors. They seem to love it in harbors. I don't know why you would want to live in a harbor, but pretty mucky, but they do it. They live in harbors. They like it right outside the mouths of harbors, especially. And of course, they live in shallow reef habitat. So if you're flying your boat or your jet ski over a shallow reef habitat, there's a chance you're going to be driving right over a turtle. Okay. Oops. Uh-oh. There we go. All right. So we have 4 sort of simple steps. We hope little simple steps to try to prevent boat strikes. Post a watch, because it's not just turtles that are in the water. We've got marine mammals in the water, dolphins, whales, swimmers. We had some swimmers that got hit by a boat a number of times, right? So post a watch. Always designate somebody on your boat to pay attention, to be looking out for things, even logs, right? You don't want to hit a log. Ensure turtle safe transit. We feel that 5 to 10 knots is something that a turtle will hear and have time to respond to. Gives also the driver of the boat time to respond as well if you're not going too fast. Wearing polarized sunglasses helps, of course, and then not feeding turtles, either directly or indirectly, right? Because what you don't want to do, like your dog, you don't want to teach your dog that, a person means food. You don't want to teach a turtle that a boat means food, right? Because you want them to swim away from a boat, not swim towards a boat, right? So fishermen, don't clean your catch and throw it into the water because you're just training turtles to eat, yeah. All right, so disrespectful viewing. That's one of our biggest challenges in Hawaii, and probably something that maybe you guys are sort of working in the world of if you're a volunteer, either here in Hanama or even, what I want to do is empower you with information so that when you're at the beach and you see some of disrespectful behaviors, you kind of know what you can say and what you can do. And so I bring up the ESA law again. Harass, harm, pursue, hunt, kill. So I don't see any hunting or killing happening here. But of all of these photos, which would you say is actually illegal under the ESA, under the law? This one for here, for sure, and this one, pursue. It doesn't actually say that it's illegal to feed. Okay, this kills me because this turtle could easily bite off their fingers like that, right? So, right, so that just scares me when people let their kids feed turtles. They are wild. So it doesn't even say illegal to touch, right? It doesn't. This turtle never even woke up. But this woman, you just want to punch her, right? Like, it's just like, this photo was sent to us by some locals that live right there at the beach, and they're so upset. So what it is, it comes back down to what we were talking about earlier about respect, right? Local, Native Hawaiians, people that have lived here long enough, know that you respect the turtles and you give them that space, right? They're a revered creature. You don't treat them like this, okay? You're not doing something wrong to the turtle. You're actually just, remember how people are viewing you when you're doing that, right? You are severely disrespecting the community, that's watching you do that. And this is where, and that's what's really hard here. And so we don't want to encourage any of these behaviors. What we do want to say and what we do want to do is talk about respectful viewing. So if you see a behavior, instead of coming at somebody and going, you're going to get a fine and that's against the law, because suddenly they've shut down. They don't even hear you anymore. They don't want to see you anymore. They don't want. But if you say, in Hawaii, we respect our honu, and we like to give them some space. Can you give them some space? And you usually get a lot more sort of buy-in and action from that if you come from a respect side of the house versus that law side of the house, because at the end of the day, all right. So we have found, basically because of Malamana Honu up at Laniakea, the work that they've been doing for over a decade, if you put, give turtles a little bit of a buffer, about 10 feet, 6 to 10 feet or so, they'll keep sleeping, they'll keep doing their thing. You can get all the pictures that you want. You can feel that you're near them and around them. And you don't have to spook them. You don't have to be disrespectful. The community feels that that the turtles are being respected. You're being respectful. And this is just sort of what we're promoting here. About 10 feet, 3 meters seems to work for everybody. So enjoying those turtles from a distance. And don't forget to use your zoom lens. I mean, I find it interesting that people feel they have to get right up to a turtle when you have a zoom on your camera, right? So use that zoom lens. This photo, perfectly okay, not a problem. Divers are getting their photos, turtles swimming by. They don't need to be right on top of it. And if you chase after it, that's a good way to get the turtle to go away, right? Versus if you just sort of hover and stay, turtle will probably stay and eat and enjoy itself. Okay, so lots of times people have been asking us about, why can't you get a PSA? We need PSAs on the airline so that when people are coming in, they see this, Well, it's been really, really hard to do that. Not only does the airline want money, but it's very, very difficult. We are not sure how the Department of Ag actually got its PSA on every incoming flight. We think there's some legislation related to that was probably enacted a long time ago, and it's sort of gotten in there, institutionalized somehow. But the funny thing is that while we may be really turtle-centric, the lifeguards want messages. People die in the water, Parks want messages out there because people go on crazy hikes and fall off cliffs, So it's not just us. Everybody would want a PSA. So that's like we're kind of battling this sort of thing. But thankfully, we had a really close relationship with the Nature Conservancy. The last couple of years, we've been doing some work with them. They had an in with Hawaiian Airlines, and so now every Hawaiian airline flight coming from the mainland U.S. into Hawaii offers our PSA. But you have to have one of those CLIQ screens in front of you. Some of the seats have the CLIQ screen. If you click on this "Help Us Stay Wild," this little banner, oops, sorry. Trying to turn down the volume. Try it again. Not very long. It's only 30 seconds. It seemed like it was really loud.
Please keep your distance and respect the marine wildlife.
All right, so it's a start, it's a start. But the challenge is that you have to click that little icon, to see the rest of it. But we've had over 500,000 clicks so far, which is really nice. Although not enough because we get 7 million visitors a year, right? So we definitely need more. But it's a start. We're trying to get there. All right, so our take-home points really from this, the little talk that I've just gave is, respecting our honu and enjoying them from a distance. Encourage your friends and your family, to sort of promote that, embody that. And if you're doing it, hopefully others are doing it as well. Never feed turtles. So just like your dog, you feed them once, you just ruined it. Don't feed them either directly or indirectly. And for fishermen, reel in that turtle if you accidentally hook one and release it without the line. It's the line that kills it. It's not the hook, it's the line. And for boaters, just watch for turtles in and near harbors for sure. That's when they're most vulnerable, is right near that harbor entrance. Keep doing that. All right, so let's talk about hawksbills real quick. Okay, so for hawksbills, we have a very small population. So while both species in Hawaii have been afforded the same protections over time, right? They're all protected starting in 1978. They were listed under the Endangered Species Act. They've been afforded the same protections, but yet the green turtle population has skyrocketed, but the hawksbill has not. So the big question is why? Why have they just not made it? Why are they struggling so hard? And so we're putting a lot of attention and focus on hawksbills. We want the public, if they see a hawksbill, to let us know that they've seen it in the water, if they're diving, snorkeling, anywhere on the beach. If you see a hawksbill, please let us know. take a look at that face. We're going to talk a little bit more about that face. There's different ways that you can notify us, either via our sort of our stranding number, this number here. You can put it in your cell phone and you have it, and I've got materials you can take with you. But put it in your phone, because when you're out on the beach and you need the number can't be back at your house. It's got to be in your phone, right? Or you can send to this website, hawaiihawksbills.org, upload your photo. You don't lose ownership of that photo. It still belongs to you, but it becomes part of the science. It becomes part of the research, because we want to know where in Hawaii people are seeing our hawksbills in the water. So, like, for example, you see this green or hawksbill. Can you tell the difference? Got two species there. It's hard, right? Is it any easier?
Yes.
A little bit, but still not so. And that's, I mean, between this one and that one, hard, right? Okay, so what you want to do is look at the faces. Look at their faces. Green turtles have two scales between their eyes, right? Hawksbills have 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is a better shot. 1, 2, 3, 4. Green turtles have that flat face because they're eating the algae off the rocks, and so they're sort of scraping. So they have more of a straight face, whereas a hawksbill's got that pointed beak because they're digging into the coral reef to get sponges and crabs, and they're sort of poking in there. So I like to think of these guys as sort of our lawnmowers, and these guys are our gardeners. So these guys come through and they chomp away at all the algae, and then these guys come by and they sort of pick clean and they make it nice and neat and sort of keep that reef nice and clean. So together they work to keep the reef nice and healthy, but it's the face that's going to ID it. When you look back at these guys, I mean, it's really hard. Like I've seen quite a few hawksbills, but I even just swimming, I don't know if I would think that that's a hawksbill. It's really hard. When they get big and they're old and their shells, it's just really hard to tell them apart. Same here. Sometimes that beak isn't as prominent. Right here, you can see a little bit better. Yep. So anyhow, so looking at the face, that's going to tell you every time. If you've got 4, you've got a hawksbill. If you've got 2, you've got a green. Same with our the little hatchlings. Little hatchlings, green turtles are gray with the white trim on their flippers and white underneath, whereas the hawksbills are brown, all brown. But if you see a little hatchling on the beach, I don't care what species it is, call us. we want to know, right? What's interesting is, yes, they've seen some hawksbills around Hanauma Bay, and we have seen little hatchlings seem to appear in the fall in Kailua and Waimanalo. Like suddenly there'll be like a little hatchling on the beach, and we're not sure if that washed in from Maui or the Big Island, because that's where most of the nesting is happening, and they washed in, or if we have a nesting female that seems to be using this coastline. They're very cryptic. They like to go underneath the bushes and in rocks. They're not as obvious as green turtles somehow. It's just they're just sneaky, and then we'll see this little hatchling on the beach, and and I'll see something on Facebook. People are posting about this hatchling. I'm like, oh my God, it's a hawksbill. Sorry. So anyhow, so our little hawksbills. All right, and that's all I've got for you guys today. And I'm going to leave this slide up while we talk and take quick questions. And if you have any questions, again, this is our stranding number. Put that in your phone. Here's our website, Malama Nahonu's website, if you're interested in volunteering with turtles here on Oahu. Hawaii Wildlife Fund on Maui, the Hawksbill program on the Big Island. Usually we like to recruit young people straight out of college for that one, because there's a lot of hiking and very remote. If you see a violation, meaning somebody's actively trying to injure or harm a turtle, that's where our violations would come in. Got my contact information. So, yeah, thanks guys for taking the time.
Can I ask you on the life cycle? After they nest, you said in the season 4 or 5 times, and then they go away. What happens? Do they die?
No. They go back to their foraging habitat. They will migrate back to their foraging habitat. So if it's a Hawaii green turtle, so she'll nest at French Frigate, and then she'll migrate back to her main Hawaiian Island foraging habitat, whether that's Oahu or Maui or Big Island, wherever she lives. She basically lives somewhere.
So how many seasons will she nest?
So a female will nest every 3 to 4 years. So not every year. So she'll do that migration every 3 to 4 years. Not for the duration of her life. So let's say she's sexually mature at age 30. She'll lay her first she'll do her first migration and do her and lay her eggs, and and then come back, and then 4 years later do that again, and 4 years, and she'll just keep doing that.
For how long? What's the
Should
lifespan?
well, lifespan is hard to know because you actually have to kill a turtle to age it because the bone in their front flippers is the humerus bone, and we can sort of look at the rings in that bone, sort of like a tree, right? So that's how you can age them. They've done some work on specimens in museums, and those turtles were 200 to 300 years old. So we actually feel that turtles could have just continued to live. So it's the wise old turtle. It's why they're, that symbol of longevity and fertility, and they are hardy and they will continue to live. Right now, given human impacts and the stresses they're under now, maybe 70, 80 years tops, probably.
And that whole time she can reproduce?
She can continue to reproduce.
Really?
And and she will probably actually get better as she gets older, laying more eggs as she gets older. So the older females are very, very valuable.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
great.
Sort of like fish, same thing. An older female lays more eggs.
Not like women.
Not like humans, no.
So, can you talk more about the turtle farms?
The turtle farms.
Yes.
I don't know if that is Kelly's expertise, or I don't know what kind of experience.
Well,
I don't know too much about turtle farms because really our management strategy is not to farm them. So that's not really a conversation that we're having in Hawaii at this time about farming them. It's not easy given the logistics of where French Frigate Shoals is to the main Hawaiian Islands, which is the only reason for doing something would be to move, restart something on the main islands. But you see turtles are already starting to do it here on the main islands. So it's more of a matter of sort of letting turtles be turtles and removing those threats. So removing predators, removing light impacts, removing, and kind of any impact to the species, and just sort of letting turtles be turtles. Because we actually haven't needed to do any hands-on management in Hawaii other than sort of stopping harvest and the population. So we dealt with the threat, which is the number one threat, which is why they were in, why the population crashed to begin with, was harvest. And so we removed that threat and the population responded. So it's really not something we need to talk about because it's sort of, we let turtles be turtles and they'll come back. The hawksbills though, so why has the hawksbill not done that? And there is some conversation that the hawksbill might need some assistance in that regard. And so that's why we support the Big Island program and Maui's program, because they protect every single nest. Every single nest, every hawksbill nest is very valuable because we want those little hatchlings to get out. And on the Big Island, they can get trapped in lava rock, and those pocket beaches are really hard. There's feral cats there. So, that's why you really have to have active volunteers and, network there to protect those nests. But yeah.
Are the green turtles the only ones that are genetically unique to Hawaii? The hawksbills are the same?
They're the
all
same.
over the world?
No, we're seeing similar strategy. So our Hawaii hawksbills are also our Hawaii hawksbills. Yeah. Yeah. But we don't have the genetic, the sort of technology isn't there to understand them as we have the green turtle. So it's not so easy to sort of split them up. But Hawaiian hawksbills, we're so isolated out here, so I'm not surprised that hawksbills are going to, be similar to our green turtles.
And then what about the sex difference in the nestlings? Due to the temperature of the sand?
Right. So the temperature of the sand determines if they're male or female, the temperature that they incubate in, which is one reason why climate change is also a problem for us. As beaches warm up, we may be producing more and more females. Some beaches have already started to see that. In Costa Rica, for example, they've started to see a lot more females being produced off the beach. Here, we don't know what our sex ratios are coming off the beach, but in our stranding record, we're still seeing 50-50. So we still have a pretty good, sex ratio differentiation here in Hawaii. So far, so good. French Frigate, luckily, is a little bit farther north, not so warm, as it is here. Yeah.
So that's true for other species as well, the difference in the
Yes,
sand temperature?
Exactly. Every species.
Determines the sex.
Yes. Yeah. They don't have a Y chromosome.
I didn't
Yeah.
realize that the temperatures then.
Yes.
depend on the time.
Right. So, and there's a pivotal temperature where the nest will make, 50-50 or so, like where you get half males, half females. Maybe some beaches were predominantly always female and other beaches always male because they were cooler beaches versus like black sand beaches might be might be producing all females, which is important. Why you want to protect numerous nesting beaches, not just one nesting beach, because What if that nesting beach only produces females? And you kind of do need some males, right, to keep the population going.
We have time for one more question. Anybody else? have a question?
Do you know where the nearest tortoises would be?
Tortoises? I don't know. Galapagos, maybe? Southeast Asia has lots of tortoises. But not in the Pacific.
Mexico have some?
Mexico probably has some, yeah. Yeah.
California does.
Yeah, but we don't see too many islands, and I think that's why the Galapagos is so unique, because you don't see too many islands with tortoises on them.
Yeah.